Welcome everybody, Shiur number 625. We're learning today Lila Nishmas Moishe Dov Ben Rabban Zisa Lila Nishmas Blima Bas Ramoisha that Yitzchak Yosef Ben Mary Malka should finally be Magzul Shuva. Okay, getting back to our malacha of TOFAIR sewing. So I just want to correct one thing which I said, which is not really 100%. As I said it, really, it's not really that something that really affects anything HILCHOS Shabbos, but it's not the way I said it over. And that is at the end of the last shiur, we spoke about the kayama, something that has a kiyum to it. Now I mentioned boina building, also in reference to, as we said, 3 stitches makes a kiyum to it, and that's why it's a problem. 3 stitches is a shaila of a deraisa. Building that has a kiyum to it, that's everlasting, is also shaila of the Raisa. It's not exactly the question of the kiyum. The only time that we see that the kiyum to it, that the something that it has the person has in mind to keep it for a long time, for a kayamadik time, a longer period of time, is that by our other malacha of kosher tying, a knot whereby one has in mind to keep it more than 24 hours or 7 days, as we've been learning this machloikis, is called a kesher shal kayama. So that same kesher, that same knot, could make a difference of if it's for 7 days they have in mind for 7 days, or they have in mind for 1 day, or they have in mind for 2 weeks. So that makes a difference. But by the other malachas that we mentioned, it's not like that. It's if somebody does an act of building, for example, I take a 2x4 and I bang it into the wall. I want to have a 2x4 on my wall for whatever reason. It's part of my wall and I want to fix my wall with 2x4. So I take a hammer, I take a nail, and I take a 2x4 and I bang it into the wall. So, and I bang 2 or 3 nails into the wall. So that's the malacha of boina. It could be makah bepatish also, which we'll talk about completion of an item. But be it as it may, the malacha of boina, it doesn't have to be a kiyum over there, because, for example, it's important to get this that we have an understanding, because I said it a little bit differently. But while we're on the subject, as they say, I want to bring the point across. That the fact that I now bang 2 or 3 nails in the wall, even 1 nail for that matter, and then I go 5 minutes later, even 10 minutes later, whatever it is, and now I pull out the nails from the wall, I pull out the 2x4 from the wall, I was still chayiv for the malach of boina. At that point, I banged in the nail, I banged in the 2x4, just the nail itself, to hang up my coat, for example. I want to have a place to hang my coat, so I take a nail, I bang it into the wall, and I start, like, now I could hang up my coat. Okay, so that's, of course, that's the malacha of boina, building, or possibly makah bepatish. Again, we're not going to get into the details, but you don't need it doesn't have to be there for a long period of time. That could be just for 5 minutes, and then I pull out the nail, and that's it. But the person was still chayiv for that malacha, because when we say boina building, it's totally in the type of building. You have sometimes a type of a building, which we're going to see, a type of a act whereby somebody puts things together, whereby there's no kiyum, meaning it's not going to last, period. The action, in other words, the action that's done is not sturdy, and it's not going to last, which we're going to see examples when we get over there. I don't want to get into it now, but that doesn't mean that to be chayiv for boina, for building, one has to do an act which is going to last. Now, the same thing by TOFAIR. If somebody does an act of sewing, the same thing. I take a needle and a thread, for example, and I sew up my cuff. Now, 5 minutes later, good, the person was chayiv. The person comes, sews up his cuff on his pants, and that's it. A person sews up a hem with 3 stitches or more, and that's it. Or 2 stitches, we said, with the knots at the end, which is the deraisa. They sew up the hem, and that's it. And 5 minutes later, they tear it apart. They tear it down. So you'll say that the person was not chayiv for TOFAIR, for sewing. They sewed the hem and finish, and it's case closed. The person's chayiv. Now, the fact that they tear open the hem, so what? What does that have to do with anything else? So the point I want to make across is, point I want to bring across is over here, that we did say that it has to do TOFAIR sewing, the 3 stitches or the 2 stitches with the knots at the end, like we said, or we spoke about boina building, or any other malacha for that matter, basically, besides kosher tying knots, which we've been talking about, does make a difference. But the other malachas of boina, TOFAIR, or TOFAIR, our malacha, it doesn't make a difference. Once the person did the action, and the action was done in a way whereby it's chayiv, like the 3 stitches or the 2 stitches and the knots at the end, the person is chayiv, and that's it. It doesn't matter how long it lasts. Now, by kosher, it does make a difference. By kosher, by the knots of kosher, which we'll talk a little bit more about, about, the Mishabura Eis Vahada brings on a beautiful Hagdama to Kaisha, beautiful introduction, which I want to go through, but I want to do when we talk about our other malacha of Kaisha tying, and Itaka says that Kaisha tying knots is the only malacha really that you have this issue whereby it's totally and how long I want to have the knot stay. Now there are now again it depending on the action also. It depends on the action of the sewing. Again, if it's just one stitch, it's nothing. If it's two stitches without the knots at the end, so then we said that's only asa midrabanan. So it's totally on the type of sewing that is done. But we will see a little bit where it does come into play, where it is a little bit connected when we talk about the sticker part of it, sticking two items together. Hamadabik the Aris, which the Rambam brings down, and the Machaba, the Shulchan Aruch brings it down. Also sticking two items together, whether it's two skins or two pieces of paper, which we're going to talk about. Then it does come into play a little bit with a kayam in reference to how long the person wanted it to stay. Then it would come into play. But in general, the building part and the regular sewing part, like we said, really once the action is done, it doesn't matter how long it lasts. It's done. It's a done deal, as they say, and it's over, case closed. But it does depend on the action. Meaning, again, like we said, the one stitch is nothing. The two stitches without the knot, that would be the rabbanon. 3 stitches would be asim and atayra. So it does depend on how it was actually done, as opposed to how long the person had in mind. Okay, just to review real quickly what we had last time. Reading from the Sefer Shabbos Home on page 68, Lamaisa, we ended off that fastening two items by tightening a thread that had connected them loosely is considered a isser of the av malacha of sewing. That's what we saw brought down in the Shulchan Aruch. Therefore, we said if a hem or a seam became loose at the ends, and the ends spread apart slightly. In other words, the hem started to open up a little bit. It started to loosen up the threads, or the seam started to loosen up the threads. It would be also, it's forbidden to pull the thread tightly. Now, a person, like we said, they pull the thread and they tighten it up. That cannot be done on Shabbos. It's similarly the same thing. It's also to secure a button by tightening the thread. The same thing, a button is loose. A person says, well, the thread is sticking out, so I'm just going to pull on the thread and thereby I'll be tightening the button. I'm not sewing anything. I'm not using thread and needle, just pulling it. We said just pulling that thread is also part of the malacha of TOFAIR sewing. Okay, from here we go to the next inyan, which is similar to, it's part of TOFAIR sewing, but it's a different way of sewing. Instead of using a thread and needle, it's brought down in the Poskim a back and forth. In other words, is one allowed to use a safety pin, a regular straight pin number one, or a regular safety pin? What do we mean by that? As opposed to a thread. Let's say somebody's cuff fell down or somebody's hem fell down, so good. I'm not taking a thread and needle to sew it up on Shabbos, obviously, but what am I going to do? I'm going to put in a safety pin, or I'll put in a straight pin to keep it up. Is that a problem? And what about if I use the safety pin or the straight pin and I put it in once, I put it in twice, I put it in 3 times? In other words, we said that 1 stitch is nothing. We said that 2 stitches is a question of the Rabban, and we said that 3 stitches, but the stitch goes in and out 3 times, 3 stitches would be asim min hatayra. So would we say the same thing by a regular safety pin, or a regular straight pin, or whatever the case might be, by a hem? If a hem fell down or somebody's cuffs fell down, they just want to keep it up for in the meantime to get through Shabbos, till they could sew it after Shabbos. Would one be allowed to do that with the various different types of stitches, 1, 2, or 3? Okay, that's what we're going to be talking about, Bezras Hashem, the upcoming Shiur, and we'll try and get into it and see the ins and outs and see how we have to work with that. Thank you for listening. Hatzlacha and bracha, kol tov.